Hello, you're on the Men's Story channel. Take a seat, and we'll get started. Sometimes a man will point out that nothing more will happen in his measured life. Everything has settled down. There is a family, a job, some well-established personal interests, a familiar circle of friends, friendly relations in the family, a loving wife and daughter. That's what I thought. I was sure that by the time I was 40, my life was fully realized, and that nothing foretold a global change. How was I mistaken? I was in the military. I did not grab stars from the sky, but I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. I got my stars on my shoulder straps mostly thanks to my business trips to hot spots, of which I had quite a few. When I went away on another business trip for 2 or 3 months, I always thought about my wife and how she would be without me. In general, there were thoughts that sagged. But there was nowhere to go. It was necessary to earn money before retirement remained very little, and spouses on my tricky questions is always very convincing. While I was wandering in the hot spots, my sweetheart was not alone in the loneliness, looking for suitors. In the end, she found the one with whom she decided to spend the rest of her days. The experience of our family life, by that time, was already 19 years. And when I came home one day from another business trip, I was met at the door by a chubby man who looked like a keg of beer, who advised me to get out, for goodness sake. Maybe it's wrong, but I have no respect for men with bellies like women in their 7th month of pregnancy. That's a lot of self-loathing. That's not the point. Olga looked out from behind him, smiling nastily, and suggested I go to hell too. Maybe if I were anyone else would have done so. But I carefully took my PM out of the holster and suggested that they face the wall, spreading their legs. To make it look as convincing as possible, I even fired a shot at the ceiling. After these two lovebirds got into the position I wanted, I hit the asphalt with the toe of my shoe a few times. I could have punched my wife as well, but I didn't. A woman after all, though it wouldn't have hurt. When the soldiers from the commandant's office arrived and tied me up, my only regret was that I was wearing uniform shoes instead of Kurzovy boots. Naturally, I was immediately kicked out of the army, but I didn't regret a thing. If the situation were to happen again, I would do exactly the same thing. As compensation for the years she had lived with me, my wife decided to take away my apartment, my car, and even my garden plot, all of which would come in handy. Her lover pulled a bunch of lawyers who at once proved that I beat her, cheated, and at the same time, drank nonstop. I didn't try very hard. I left everything to my daughter, not my wife. That's when I cared more about my nerves. My daughter somehow immediately took her mother's side. I took it as a given. She was a mother, but without much emotion, though my heart hurt unbearably. I had minimum service time, besides I had to fight a little, and as a consequence I got order and a shrapnel in my back, which caused hard pains in the back. Doctors gave a distressing prognosis. Over time, my legs can fail. They gave me a small pension and I got a job at the school as a security guard, but I did not work long. My divorce and the experience had put me on the fast track. After a while, my left leg began to grow numb and dry. I lived in my parents' small apartment in an old 2-story house, knowing full well that this was where I was to spend the time allocated by fate. When I finally lost the ability to move, I sat and smoked a pipe, huddled in the corner of an old leather couch. Loneliness did not depress me. I did not want to communicate. In all this time, Olga and my daughter Veronica had never called me. I heard nothing more about my former family. They finally broke off all relations with me, as they say, wrote off all the accounts. I did not hold on them angry, but the betrayal of my own daughter had left a bleeding wound in my heart. I puffed on the smoke, put the pipe down, stood up, and hobbled into the kitchen. My gaze fell on a bottle of cognac. I had started 100 grams, and some fried potatoes wouldn't hurt. I lived like this for about a year. My leg was hurting more and more, and now I could hardly sit up. I was beginning to think I was getting close to sundown. I often went for a walk in the park, which was 70 meters from the house, and the cat followed me there. It wouldn't leave my side, constantly circling around me. It looked like a Siamese. I do not know much about them, but it was well groomed, lost or ran away from the old owners. I took her home. Thought I might find her owners. Named the cat Musi. She seemed to like it too. Moose did not get off me, lay down in the places where there was pain. It was as if she felt what place it bothers me. She could sit in several places for an hour, in the places that hurt the most. The pain was slowly easing up, not as much as before, but still. Musa and I began to walk more often, and to spend more time outside. The cat led the way, always walked ahead of me, or sat in my arms. And then another time, Musa rushed out into the street. She stood on her hind legs near the front door and started screaming. We went to the same square. Just I sat down and stretched out my leg when I heard women screaming. Help, catch. I look, a young guy with a woman's purse in his hands runs towards me. I got up and decided to stop him. The guy dropped me, but I managed to catch his leg with my cane. He fell down. I twisted him off. Of course, I took his purse. A girl of about 30 came running up, still out of breath, gestured for her purse that I had in my hand. She looked in it, checked some documents, and sighed with relief. Thank you, man. If it weren't for you, I would have been lost, she said, curtly and panting. There's blood on your face. You need help. I must have hit the sidewalk with my face when I fell. It's nothing, just a scratch, but I twisted my ankle a little bit. It hurt more. I explained that I lived in the building next door, and we followed him to my apartment. Followed. That's a big word. I could barely move. For the first time, I let out a tear from the unbearable pain in my leg and spine. The girl's name was Victoria. In her purse, she had plane tickets and documents for training in Switzerland, which she had received half an hour before we met. The girl gave me the garden and asked me a lot of questions. How did I, such a handsome man, to get to the point of loneliness and such a life in general? We had a very nice talk. I did not take my eyes off her. Vika, like a magnet, attracted me to herself. But I realized that all these feelings, this is my imagination. Nothing serious was going to happen to me, and the age difference of 10 years, also an argument in my favor. I'm not talking about the furnishings in my apartment. Muja was just as fond of Victoria as I was. She wouldn't let go of her hands. Vika never ceased to wonder what kind and beautiful cat I have. Talking to her, we felt like a whole eternity. In fact, a couple of hours. Until she told me that in 5 hours, she has a plane. And she wouldn't be back for 6 months. Or maybe she's not coming back at all. She has plans to live in Switzerland, as there are much more conditions for medical professionals to develop. We have medicine intentionally ruined, so I just do not stay here, confidently pronounced Vika. She worked as a cosmetic surgeon in one of the clinics in our city. She had not much practice, but she has already managed to approve herself without the help of parents. Her father and mother served in Afghanistan as military doctors, and they met there. Now deep in retirement, they are now fighting with each other, Victoria said with a smile. So I understand and know what it means to be in war. And no one needs veterans, let alone disabled people, in our country. Vadim, I have to go by plane. I may be late. I will call you. Don't forget the painkillers I wrote on a piece of paper. I'll figure out how to help you. That's Victoria's last words. I'm alone again. For the first time in a year and a half, I didn't feel alone. I felt the self-pity I'd been chasing away for so long. I'll find a way to help you, Vadim repeated Vicky's words. Go back to Switzerland and forget about me. The next morning, Muska dragged me out of the house at 8 a.m. I, of course, resisted, but my militant friend, I began to call Muja. After jointly capturing the offender, threatened to poop right on the doorstep. By the way, many may have a question. And where did the guy go bagged? In general, while we were getting acquainted and polite, The guy vanished, but we are not particularly upset. Home, we were returning to the dinner, and near the entrance, I noticed a movement that I had not previously observed. A grandfather and a grandmother, both decently dressed, were arguing about something, and they were arguing so violently that I practically walked past them, or rather, I wiggled my way past them. "Young man, didn't they teach you to say hello?" asked a woman of Balzac age. Remarkably, she was wearing a hat, and her face had makeup on. "Hello," I answered at a loss. "Hello, Vadim," they both said hello. "We don't know you, but we know a lot about you. We parents Victoria brought drugs that Vika prescribed you," replied the woman. "By the way, my name is Tatiana Sergeyevna, and this is my husband, Kuznetsov, Nikolai Petrovich." "Pleased to meet you," I also responded, confused. Was extremely surprised at this meeting, but was extremely pleased with the presence of these nice, interesting, and at the same time, funny, elderly people. Inviting them into the house, I gave my guests tea, and Tatiana Sergeyevna a strong, freshly brewed coffee. My new acquaintances, in addition to medicines, picked up a bunch of sweets from the cookery. They stayed with me until evening. We had a very heartfelt conversation, exactly like they were my parents. Then I couldn't give them the money for the medicine they had brought. They flatly refused to take the money. "Vadim, tomorrow you need to see Alexei Yurievich, a longtime friend of mine, at the regional hospital who will examine you. Well, and then we'll see what to do next," said Nikolai Petrovich. "We are indebted to you. Our Vicky would never have a second chance. The fact that she went to Switzerland is her dream. You're kind. Every man would have done that," I replied. "Not every man," replied Tatiana Sergeyevna. Vika's ex-boyfriend, aka ex-husband, did not lift a heavier handle in his life. He's of noble blood, you see. Anyway, let's not talk about it. The next morning, I was already examined by Alexei Yurievich, who treated me like his son. It turns out that there were 2 splinters in my back, and if they do not take out, then in the near future, I will stop to walk at all. The surgery was scheduled for the next day. How in the countless hospitals and clinics of the Ministry of Defense, I have not found the second splinter. This question I asked myself all day, but I found no answer. The only thing that came to mind was that we, soldiers, surgeons, and officers, were not needed by our country after we had been taken advantage of. And then I remembered the words of Lieutenant Colonel Smirnov, chief doctor in the departmental polyclinic. He told me if we were to operate and remove the splinter, we had only a 10% chance of success. Most likely you won't be able to walk after the surgery, so you have to live with the iron in your spine. Later that evening, I got a call from Victoria in Switzerland. "Vadim, everything will be fine. You will do the surgery himself, Alexei. He is a great surgeon and a great man. He also owes his life to my father. He won't let us down. You're a strong man, and I really like you." That last phrase really inspired me. Closer to the evening of the next day, I came out of the anesthesia. Tatiana Sergeyevna was sitting next to me. "In a few days, you will be discharged from the hospital. And Victoria asked me to give you these flowers. She called me the other day. She was very worried about you. Tatiana Sergeyevna, I don't know how to thank you. I'm in tears. A week ago, I was afraid I would be able to walk and sleep normally without any pain. Come on, Vadim, you're a good man, and that's enough. We have a lot of people like that on the ground now. Nikolai and I have also been through several wars. We've seen a lot. It's hard to be alone after that. Listen, young man, what if you stay at our dacha for a week or 2? You need care, don't you? It would be more fun for me and my grandfather. It's embarrassing, Tatiana Sergeyevna. You've done so much for me. What's embarrassing? We're all alone anyway. Victoria will come in a few months at best, and not for long. And we'll have something to talk about. And I can take my friend to the cottage with me. Did I ask? What friend? Tatiana Sergeyevna got worried. "It's not what you think. This is my cat. I can't leave her alone in the apartment." 4 days later, I was discharged. Tatiana Sergeyevna and Nikolai Petrovich greeted me on the street. I lived at the dacha of my new loved ones for 2 months, not 2 weeks. After a month, I was already helping out around the house. 2 or 3 times a week, Vika would call me and I would talk to her for an hour at a time. I never thought that a trained military and cosmetic surgeon would have so many common topics of conversation. We found it interesting to talk, even to be silent sometimes. There was something about that united us too. As I began to walk normally, I got a lot of opportunities that were previously out of my reach. I had no trouble finding a good job as head of security in the office, which was also headed by a former military man. In general, in my life, in front there was a white light, perspective, and meaning. I began to call Victoria almost every day. She had no opportunity to come home, and so she called me to visit. 3 months later, I took a vacation and went to Switzerland. My cat, Musia, left on Tatiana Sergeyevna and Nikolai Petrovich. For the second time in my life, we saw each other, and it immediately became obvious to me that Victoria was the right woman, my other half. Being in the city of Bern, I realized that the world is really small. At the theater, Victoria and I met my daughter Veronica with a man, the lover of my ex-wife. It turns out that my daughter was not keeping up with her mother. She stole her man and moved to Switzerland to live. We never got to talk. The daughter became much more arrogant than her mother. It was clear from what she said that I should have been living a miserable life in an orphanage somewhere, or at least living out my last days in bed. After that meeting, I never met my daughter or my ex-girlfriend again. I heard rumors that things were sad for her. I didn't really care. Everyone has their own way, their own road. Victoria and I got married. After we got married, we lived in Switzerland for about a year, and then we returned to our home country and opened our own plastic surgery clinic. There was always something missing. The scenery and nature are not the same as in our country. This feeling is very difficult to explain. Now sometimes I remember that a few years ago, I was sitting in a park near my home, thinking about the sunset of my existence. And everything, as it seemed to me, began with my cat, which somehow appeared in my life. And the conclusion of this story is simple. Nothing in our lives just happens. That's the story. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell not to miss new stories.